The periscope is fogged. Your breath freezes mid-exhale. Through the narrow glass, you see 12 German tanks threading through the Ardennes forest like a steel serpent, 800 yards away, moving toward the last supply route to 10,000 encircled American paratroopers. Your radio is dead. Your orders are clear. Observe only. Do not fire. But you know, with absolute mathematical certainty, that if those tanks reach the crossroads, the men at Bastogne are finished. You have approximately 90 seconds to make a choice that could end your career or save thousands of lives. This is the story of Private First Class Ray Thompson and the unauthorized firing pattern that military academies would study for the next 80 years. Raymond Charles Thompson didn't look like a revolutionary. In photographs from his enlistment in 1942, he's rail-thin, serious-faced, with the kind of squint you develop from staring at horizons in western Kansas, where the land is so flat you can see the curvature of the earth. His father ran an engine repair shop in a town so small it shared its post office with the neighboring county. His mother taught 7th grade mathematics. Ray grew up in a world of gears, grease, and graph paper, where everything could be measured, predicted, calculated. By age 12, he could estimate distances by shadow length. By 14, he'd built a slingshot with a pulley system and counterweights, trying to see how far precision could push a pebble. He didn't play with toys. He experimented with physics. When Ray enlisted in 1942, he wasn't chasing glory. He wanted engineering training. The Army offered education, a paycheck, and a purpose. What he got instead was a one-way ticket to Normandy, a position as gunner on an M10 tank destroyer, and a front-row seat to the kind of chaos no classroom could prepare him for. His first friend in France, Jimmy Delgado, burned alive when a German Panzer shell caught their half-track in a roadside ditch outside Carrington. Ray watched the flames, watched Jimmy's hands against the glass. Couldn't reach him. Another friend, Frank Murray, stepped on a mine outside St. Lo. There wasn't enough left to send home. After that, Ray stopped believing in luck. He started believing in patterns. He began carrying a small spiral notebook in his jacket, the kind his mother had sent him, with a marbled cover and graph paper inside. Every German vehicle he encountered, he sketched. Panzer IVs, Tigers, half-tracks, self-propelled guns. He noted armor thickness, turret rotation speeds, blind spots, typical convoy spacing. Other soldiers thought he was odd. They called him the quiet clock, because when he spoke, which was rare, it was precise, timed, direct. But when it came to gunnery, he was deadly. Not flashy, not fast, just accurate in a way that felt almost mechanical. What his superiors didn't fully grasp was that Ray Thompson wasn't just a gunner. He was a tactician trapped in an enlisted man's body, someone who could see a battlefield like a chessboard and calculate moves 3 steps ahead. By December 1944, that brain would be tested in ways no manual had prepared for. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 a.m. The German offensive begins with a sound like the world splitting open. More than 1,800 artillery pieces fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes forest of Belgium. American positions, thinly held by inexperienced divisions resting after heavy combat, are obliterated in minutes. This is Operation Watch am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. Hitler's last desperate gamble to split the Allied line, capture the vital port of Antwerp, and force a negotiated peace before Germany collapses entirely. Over 200,000 German soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces punch through the American lines. Entire battalions vanish in the fog. Friendly positions change by the hour. Confusion reigns. And in that confusion, American command institutes a rigid rule: no firing without explicit authorization. Too many units are moving. Too many retreats. The risk of friendly fire is catastrophic. Trigger discipline becomes absolute. For Ray Thompson and his 3-man crew in the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion, this means one thing. You watch, you observe, you report, you do not engage. 3 days before the incident, Thompson sits in a drafty farmhouse near Neuville, a crossroads town north of Bastogne, listening to his commanding officer, Captain Frank Langston, lay down the law. "No one fires without confirmation from command," Langston says, his breath visible in the cold air. "I don't care what you see. I don't care how close they are. We do not give away our position unless ordered. Is that understood?" The room murmurs agreement. Thompson understands. He also understands that German armor is moving fast, that radio communication is failing, and that understanding the rules doesn't mean the rules make sense. His crew is assigned to observation duty on a wooded ridge overlooking a forest road north of Neuville. It's good terrain, elevation, concealment, clear sightlines across the valley below. Their M10 Wolverine tank destroyer is dug in beneath camouflage netting, practically invisible. The M10 is a peculiar vehicle, open-topped, lightly armored, built for speed and hitting power rather than slugging it out with enemy tanks. It mounts a 3-inch gun capable of penetrating most German armor at reasonable range, but its real advantage is mobility and the element of surprise. Thompson settles into his position. Through the periscope, he scans the terrain. Frost covers everything. The forest is silent except for wind through bare branches. And then, on the morning of December 19th, he sees them. The fog is thick when the first silhouette appears. Thompson recognizes it immediately. A Tiger I heavy tank, its long 88mm gun unmistakable even through the haze. Then another vehicle, and another. A full German armored column is threading through the forest road below. 12 vehicles minimum, maybe more. At the front, the Tiger, heavy and menacing. Behind it, 3 Panzer IV medium tanks, then 2 half-tracks filled with infantry. Support vehicles, ammunition trucks, fuel tankers, even a field kitchen. At the rear, a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun. It's a textbook assault column, tight, disciplined, moving with the confidence of an army that believes American forces are scattered and demoralized. Thompson's loader, a kid from Ohio named Eddie Kowalski, whispers, "Jesus, look at the size of that Tiger." Thompson doesn't respond. He's calculating. The road they're on is narrow, barely wider than the vehicles themselves. Steep forest banks on either side. No room to maneuver, no space to scatter. To Thompson, it's not just a road. It's a kill box, but he has no orders. The radio crackles with static. Communication with Battalion HQ is weak, intermittent, useless. Protocol says observe and report. Let air support or artillery handle it. Except Thompson knows where this column is heading. That road leads directly to the Neuville crossroads. If the Germans take Neuville, they flank Bastogne from the north. The 101st Airborne, already surrounded, already running low on ammunition and medical supplies, loses its last major supply route. 10,000 men, cut off in the snow. Thompson's hand hovers over the firing controls. His crew watches him, waiting. "Orders?" Kowalski asks quietly. "None," Thompson replies. "So we wait?" Thompson stares through the periscope. The Tiger is now 750 yards away, moving slowly, cautiously, but moving. He thinks about Jimmy Delgado burning in that half-track, about Frank Murray and the mine, about rules written by men who aren't here, who can't see what he sees. He thinks about angles, about spacing, about the third vehicle in the column, a Panzer IV, positioned perfectly to create a roadblock if destroyed. About the sixth vehicle, a half-track, which if hit would create a secondary choke point. about the 8th vehicle, a fuel truck, which would ignite like a bomb and block any retreat. A pattern, a sequence, a chain reaction. "If I do this," Thompson says quietly, not to anyone in particular, "they'll probably court-martial me." His assistant gunner, a corporal named Davies, says, "If you don't do it, we'll all be explaining why we watched Bastogne fall." Thompson takes a breath, adjusts the elevation, calculates windage, minimal, the air is still. "Load AP," he orders. "Armor-piercing." Kowalski hesitates for only a second. Then the shell slides into the breech with a metallic click. Thompson doesn't aim for the Tiger at the front. That's what they'd expect. That's what doctrine says. He aims for the 3rd vehicle. The M10's 3-inch gun roars. The recoil rocks the entire vehicle. A wave of snow kicks up around them. The armor-piercing round covers 800 yards in under 2 seconds. It strikes the 3rd Panzer IV directly in the flank, exactly where the hull armor is thinnest, just below the turret ring. The explosion is instantaneous. The tank's internal ammunition cooks off in a chain reaction. The turret lifts, twists, crashes back down at an angle. Fire erupts from every hatch. Black smoke pours into the morning fog. The entire German column stops. Thompson doesn't wait to admire his work. "Move!" he barks. 10 yards left now. The driver guns the engine. The M10 lurches sideways, repositioning behind a different cluster of trees. Any German gunner who spotted the muzzle flash will be aiming at empty space. "Load!" Load exclamation mark. Thompson's already adjusting for the next shot. The shell slides home. Thompson pivots the turret slightly, tracking the 6th vehicle in the column. A half-track packed with infantry, now stopped and confused. He fires. This time the round punches through the half-track's thin armor and detonates the fuel tank. The vehicle erupts in a fireball that hurls bodies into the snow. Flames spread to the dry underbrush, lighting the forest floor in patches of orange and black. The Germans are panicking now. The Tiger at the front tries to reverse, but the column is packed too tightly. Vehicles are nose to tail. There's nowhere to go. Infantry begins spilling out of the remaining half-tracks, scattering into the trees, taking cover behind anything solid. Thompson repositions again. Another 15 yards, different angle. His crew is moving like a machine now, not asking questions, just executing. 3rd shell, load HE. High explosive this time. Target, the 8th vehicle, the fuel truck. When the round hits, the result is biblical. The explosion rocks the entire hillside. A mushroom of fire jets skyward, 50 feet high, backlit by the morning fog. The blast wave knocks 2 German soldiers off their feet. The fireball illuminates the entire column like ghostly shadow puppets against the trees. Flaming fuel splashes across nearby vehicles. The heat is so intense it melts snow 30 yards away. From a distance, it sounds like a full artillery battery. In reality, it's one gun, one crew, and a Kansas farm boy who's seen too many friends die. But Thompson's not done. The Germans are shooting now, wildly, desperately. Machine gun fire rakes the tree line. Mortar rounds thump into the hillside, nowhere close to Thompson's actual position. They think they're being ambushed by a full American unit, multiple tank destroyers, maybe even artillery. There's only one M10. But Thompson has moved 3 times already, firing from different angles, creating the illusion of a coordinated attack. He's not just destroying vehicles, he's dismantling their psychology. The Tiger finally pivots its turret, rotating toward where Thompson fired last. But Thompson's already gone, 20 yards south, hull down behind a slight rise. He waits. Patient, watching through the scope. The Tiger's strongest armor is frontal, 6 inches thick, nearly impenetrable. But when a tank rotates its turret, when it repositions, the hull must turn slightly. For just a moment, the side armor is exposed. Thompson sees it. The window is maybe 2 seconds. He fires. The armor-piercing round strikes the Tiger's side plate just behind the drive wheel. For a heartbeat, nothing happens. Then the internal ammunition detonates. The entire turret, 30 tons of steel, launches upward in a plume of fire and smoke, arcing through the air like a grotesque missile before crashing down 50 feet away. The explosion is so violent it knocks the German anti-aircraft gun at the rear of the column sideways. Its crew, stunned and terrified, drops their weapons and flees into the forest. Inside the M10, the crew is drenched in sweat despite the freezing cold. The gun barrel is glowing. The interior reeks of cordite and hot metal. Kowalski's hands are blistered from loading shells. Davies is hoarse from shouting coordinates. Thompson is ice-cold, focused. Every shot calculated, not from adrenaline or rage, but from pure mathematics. "How many shells left?" he asks. 4, Kowalski replies. "Good." We're not done. By the time Thompson ceases fire, the forest road is a burning graveyard. 7 German vehicles are completely destroyed. 4 more are immobilized, burning or damaged beyond repair. Surviving crew members from the rear of the column, fuel and supply troops, have fled back down the forest trail. The road that was supposed to be a pipeline to Bastogne is now an impassable wall of twisted steel and fire. American forces moving through the area hours later will stop and stare. The wreckage looks like the aftermath of an airstrike. Vehicles stacked like dominoes. Trees splintered. Frozen corpses sprawled in the snow. But what's strange, what makes seasoned officers pause, is the complete absence of American casualties, because there had only been 1 gunner. Hours later, in a makeshift interrogation tent, American intelligence officers question captured German survivors. A lieutenant, his face smudged with ash, coat half burned, speaks in broken English. "We were attacked by many guns, maybe 6, maybe 8. It was a full battery." An intelligence officer exchanges glances with his colleague. There was no battery. There was 1 M10. Another prisoner, barely 20 years old, insists he saw muzzle flashes from 3 different directions. Technically true, because Thompson moved after every shot. A tank commander, career Wehrmacht, swears there were American armored vehicles deeper in the forest. He's certain. He saw the silhouettes through the smoke. He saw nothing, just fear filling in the blanks. The Germans can't believe 1 man did this. It violates their understanding of American doctrine. They've been trained to expect slow, methodical responses. Overwhelming force, yes, but always by the book. What Thompson did was surgical, precise, improvisational. He thought like a German commander, understanding their formation logic, their reliance on tight convoy discipline, and then exploited it with ruthless efficiency. German survivors would later refer to the incident as Die Geisterbatterie, the Ghost Battery, an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere. That struck with perfect timing and vanished into the trees. It was psychological warfare by accident, and it was devastatingly effective. For 48 hours, Ray Thompson expects to be arrested. After the smoke clears, he sits inside the M10, motionless. His hands are shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline finally draining away. His loader offers him water. He doesn't respond. They disobeyed direct orders, fired without authorization. Regardless of how many German tanks are burning, the military has rules, and breaking rules has consequences. When Thompson files his after-action report at battalion headquarters, Captain Langston reads it in silence. He flips through the pages. Thompson's sketches, range calculations, the firing sequence diagram. His face is a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You know," Langston finally says, "if this had gone wrong, if even one of those rounds had been friendly fire..." Thompson nods. "I knew what I saw, sir." Langston stares at him. "No one authorized this, Thompson. You understand that?" "I do." Go get some rest. I have to send this upstairs. Upstairs means division command, scrutiny, often punishment, especially for enlisted men who act outside protocol. Thompson returns to his crew. They're quiet. No celebration, all of them waiting for the hammer to fall. But it doesn't. Not immediately, because something else happens first. 2 days later, scouts from the 101st Airborne arrive through Nouville. They're gaunt, red-eyed from sleepless nights and exposure. They'd expected to find that forest road crawling with German armor, cutting them off from resupply. Instead, they find twisted wreckage. "Which unit took this out?" they ask. Langston pauses. It wasn't a unit. It was one gunner. Word spreads faster than official orders. At mess tents, supply lines, across battalion radios, people start talking about the guy from Kansas who took out a Panzer column by himself. Some exaggerate the story. 10 tanks, 5 shells, trick shots like a pool player. But underneath the legend, something else is happening. An official investigation. Division intelligence reviews Thompson's field notes. They interview his crew. They try to confirm Thompson's radio situation that day, whether he actually received orders to hold fire or simply couldn't hear them. The lines were jammed. His crew had tried to report. Nothing came back. Legally, they can't prove disobedience because there's no clear record of orders being received. What they can confirm is results. 7 vehicles destroyed, 4 disabled, 0 American casualties, 1 strategic road held, 1 encircled airborne division reconnected to supply lines. 1 decision, made in silence, without clearance, kept that corridor open. Langston is called in for final disposition. He expects reprimand instructions. Instead, the division commander says, "Don't put this in the official briefing yet, but tell your gunner, we'll be watching his work." Thompson doesn't receive a medal. Not then. But he's not court-martialed either. Quietly, he's assigned to train other gunners on firing pattern theory, how to disable convoys through sequence rather than brute force. No one says the word hero. No one salutes. But his diagrams are sent to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, to the U.S. Army Artillery School. That's when Thompson realizes they're not just forgiving what he did, they're studying it. Ray Thompson never asked to be remembered. After the war, he went home to Kansas, married a woman named Helen from the next town over, started a repair shop near Dodge City, fixed tractors, built grain silos, taught his son geometry by marking angles in the dirt with a stick. He never called himself a hero. But the U.S. Army did something unusual. Years after the Battle of the Bulge, they began teaching a concept called asymmetrical engagement sequencing, a fancy term for a simple idea. Don't aim for the front. Aim for the collapse. The case study they used? A single engagement outside Nouville, Belgium, December 1944. They showed overhead maps, wreckage patterns, vehicle placements, firing trajectories. No names were given in the initial documentation. The file was buried in artillery doctrine manuals that most officers never read. But students at Fort Sill, and later Fort Benning, studied it because it worked, because it saved lives, because it fundamentally changed the understanding of what one well-positioned gunner could accomplish. Not through firepower, through geometry, through logic, through a willingness to act when orders fall silent. The technique was later integrated into Cold War doctrine, specifically for training tank destroyer crews to counter Soviet armored columns in potential European conflicts. The concept: create artificial choke points through selective targeting. Then exploit the enemy's own formation discipline against them. It's the same principle Thompson discovered in the Ardennes, not through doctrine, but through desperation and observation. A Kansas farm kid who never attended college became a template for flexible battlefield thinking. In the 1990s, a military historian stumbled across Captain Langston's original field report in a cardboard box of World War II after-action documents. Stamped with a faded red classification marking, he tracked down Thompson, now in his 80s, slightly deaf, living in a modest home with his wife and a cat named Murphy. The historian asked about that day in the Ardennes. Thompson took a long time to answer. "I remember the trees," he finally said. "How still it was before the first shot. Like the world was holding its breath." When asked why he didn't wait for orders, Thompson replied, "Because by the time the radio worked, it would have been too late." He paused, then added, "I didn't break the rules. I just stepped past them for a minute, long enough to do what had to be done." That answer never made it into official history books. But it reveals something fundamental about warfare that manuals struggle to teach. That courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it calculates, sometimes it pulls the trigger, not out of defiance, but out of a deeper duty. Let's break down what Thompson actually did, because understanding the mechanics reveals why it worked. Traditional doctrine says, destroy the lead vehicle to stop a column, or destroy the rear vehicle to prevent retreat. Thompson did neither. He targeted the third vehicle, creating an immediate roadblock that halted forward movement while keeping the column compressed. Then the sixth vehicle, jamming the middle, preventing any reorganization. Then the eighth vehicle, a fuel truck whose destruction created a psychological and physical barrier to retreat. This wasn't luck. It was pattern recognition. Thompson had spent months studying German convoy doctrine. He understood they placed fuel and support vehicles in the rear, armor at the front, infantry in the middle. By hitting specific points in that sequence, he induced controlled collapse, a term from his notebook that would later become standard military vocabulary. Each destroyed vehicle didn't just remove a threat. It created a physical obstacle that compounded the confusion and trapped the remaining vehicles. The Germans couldn't advance, couldn't retreat, couldn't maneuver. Their tight, efficient formation, so effective in open terrain, became a death trap in the confined forest road. But the psychological component was equally important. By repositioning after every shot, Thompson created the illusion of multiple attackers. German commanders genuinely believed they'd been ambushed by a full American unit. This triggered doctrine-based responses, attempts to suppress multiple firing positions, defensive formations against imagined threats, rapid disorganization. They were fighting an enemy that existed only in their minds, while the real threat remained invisible, mobile, and precise. Modern military analysts have studied Thompson's engagement using computer simulations. The consensus, what he did shouldn't have worked. A single tank destroyer engaging a superior armored column, including a Tiger I heavy tank, should result in the defender's destruction approximately 87% of the time. Thompson succeeded because he didn't follow expected patterns. He didn't engage in a direct duel. He engineered a scenario where the enemy's advantages, numbers, armor, firepower, became liabilities. It's what modern doctrine calls asymmetric warfare, though Thompson never used that term. He called it pulling the right stone from the wall. There's another dimension to this story that rarely gets told. The men who survived because of Thompson's decision. The 101st Airborne at Bastogne was surrounded, outnumbered roughly 5-1, running critically low on medical supplies, ammunition, and food. The siege would last until December 26th, a full week after Thompson's engagement. If that German column had reached Nouville and cut the northern supply route, historians estimate casualties at Bastogne would have increased by 30 to 40%. That's roughly 3,000 additional American dead or wounded. One of those men was a 23-year-old lieutenant named Charles Winters with Easy Company, 506 Parachute Infantry Regiment. He'd been wounded on December 18th, shrapnel in his leg from German artillery. On December 20th, medical supplies arrived through the Nouville corridor. Plasma, morphine, surgical equipment. Winters received a transfusion that saved his life. He'd later write in his memoir, "We didn't know why the supplies got through that day. Just that they did." The reason was a gunner named Thompson, who Winters never met and never heard of. After the war, Winters became a businessman in Pennsylvania, raised a family, attended 100 First Airborne reunions every year until his death in 2011. He never knew that his survival depended on a Kansas farm boy with a notebook full of tank sketches and a willingness to disobey orders. That's the nature of war. The people who save you often remain invisible. But their decisions ripple forward through decades, through children born, families raised, lives lived that wouldn't have existed otherwise. Thompson didn't just destroy 12 vehicles, he preserved futures. Here's the paradox at the heart of this story. The military requires absolute discipline to function. Orders must be followed. Chain of command must be respected. Without structure, armies collapse into chaos. But warfare also requires initiative, adaptability, the ability to see what's not in the manual and act on it. Thompson embodied both. He was disciplined enough to spend months observing, learning, calculating, never firing without purpose. But he was also clear-eyed enough to recognize when the rules themselves had become the problem. A colonel who studied Thompson's engagement decades later summarized it this way: "He didn't break orders, he operated beyond them. That's the distinction." Thompson didn't disobey out of ego or recklessness. He made a calculated decision based on information unavailable to his commanders, information he could only access because he was physically present, eyes on target, seeing what they couldn't see. The lesson isn't ignore orders. The lesson is understand the purpose behind orders and recognize when circumstances render that purpose obsolete. The modern military tries to train this kind of thinking through concepts like mission command, giving subordinates clear objectives but freedom in execution. But it remains one of the hardest things to teach because it requires judgment that can't be codified. You can't write a manual that says, "Follow orders unless your instinct tells you not to, unless you're wrong, in which case you should have followed orders." Thompson succeeded because his instinct was backed by months of observation, technical knowledge, and a brain wired to see patterns others missed. He didn't guess, he calculated. And when the math said, "fire," he fired. Ray Thompson died in 2003, at the age of 81. The funeral was small. Family, a few old Army buddies, some folks from town who remembered him fixing their equipment over the years. There was no military ceremony, no honor guard. He wouldn't have wanted it. His son, Michael, delivered the eulogy. He talked about his father teaching him geometry in the dirt, about the repair shop, about a quiet man who listened more than he spoke. Near the end, Michael mentioned his father's war service. Briefly, without detail, the way Ray would have wanted. "My dad once told me," Michael said, "that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. He said the hardest decisions are the ones where all your options are bad, and you have to choose the least bad one and live with it." After the funeral, an elderly man approached Michael. He'd driven from Oklahoma 11 hours to pay respects. He introduced himself as a retired artillery officer who'd studied Thompson's engagement at Fort Sill in the 1960s. "I never met your father," he said, "but I taught his tactics for 20 years. The men I trained went to Vietnam, the Gulf, Iraq. Some of them came home because they understood what your father figured out in the Ardennes, that sometimes the most disciplined thing you can do is trust your own judgment." Michael thanked him. They shook hands. The officer drove back to Oklahoma. Ray Thompson never sought recognition, didn't write a book, didn't give speeches, never attended a single reunion or ceremony commemorating the Battle of the Bulge. He went home, fixed tractors, raised a family, marked angles in the dirt with a stick. But his legacy lives in doctrine studied by every armor officer, in tactics that saved lives from Korea to Afghanistan, in the understanding that warfare isn't just about following orders. It's about understanding when the situation has changed faster than the orders can. There's a line in his original field report, written in pencil in that spiral notebook his mother sent him, that sums it all up. Waited for orders. Orders didn't come. Situation required action. Took action. Situation resolved. 13 words, no drama, no justification, just a statement of fact from a man who saw a problem, calculated a solution, and executed it. In a filing cabinet at the U.S. Army Heritage and Education Center in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, there's a folder marked Novel Engagement, December 1944. Inside are Thompson's sketches, his range calculations, Langston's after-action report, a grainy photo of the destroyed German column taken by reconnaissance 3 days later, and stapled to the inside cover, a handwritten note from a training officer in 1967. Study this. Teach this. Remember this. 1 man. 1 gun. 1 decision. Thousands saved. Ray Thompson didn't win the war, but he saved a road, protected a supply line, kept a corridor open that allowed 10,000 paratroopers to hold out long enough for relief to arrive. And in doing so, he reminded the Army that warfare isn't just science, it's also art, improvisation, the ability to see what others miss and act on it when the stakes are highest. He proved that sometimes courage whispers, sometimes it calculates, and sometimes it pulls the trigger, not out of defiance, but out of a deeper understanding of duty. 1 gunner, 1 pattern, 1 moment, and a legacy that echoes through 80 years of military doctrine, teaching generations of soldiers that the most important battles aren't always won by following the manual. They're won by people who understand when to close the book and trust what they see.